After years of silence surrounding one of music's most private legends, a new voice has finally emerged from the shadows, and it's coming from someone who understands D'Angelo more deeply than anyone else possibly could. Imani Archer, the daughter the world hardly even knew existed, is stepping into the spotlight. And what she's now revealing about her father's hidden struggles, his private battles, and his lasting legacy has left fans in complete shock, from the unspoken truths of fame to the pain buried deep within the family. This isn't just some ordinary celebrity headline. It's a revelation capable of changing everything people thought they knew about D'Angelo. But the most shocking part is still ahead, the part the industry never wanted to surface. For decades, D'Angelo has remained one of music's most enigmatic figures, known for his soulful voice, intense need for privacy, and long disappearances from the public eye. He built a legacy defined as much by silence as by his unmatched genius. Fans have always questioned what truly lies behind the curtain of his life: the heartbreaks, the battles, the brilliance. But now, for the first time ever, that silence is being broken from within his own bloodline. Her name is Imani Archer, the daughter of D'Angelo. For years, hardly anyone ever spoke about her. She grew up on the outskirts of her father's fame, watching from the background as the world worshipped his music without ever really knowing the man behind it. And now, as she steps forward to share her truth, it's becoming clear that her voice might be the missing piece in understanding D'Angelo's complicated legacy.
In this video, we're diving deep into who Imani Archer truly is, not just as D'Angelo's daughter, but as a woman determined to define her own identity in a world that only recognizes her father's name. We'll uncover the details she's shared about her upbringing, the emotional distance between her and D'Angelo, and the way fame, pain, and legacy intertwine in ways few can imagine. What Imani has revealed about the hidden cost of fame, the buried family secrets, and the truth she claims the industry tried to silence will leave you stunned. Stay with us, because by the end of this video, the way you see D'Angelo and his story will be entirely transformed. Let's start with the very first chapter of this journey: how Imani Archer's name came to light, and what her early years expose about the hidden world that existed behind D'Angelo's fame. For years, barely anyone even knew D'Angelo was a father, while the world remained captivated by his voice, artistry, and mysterious disappearance from the limelight. The story of Imani Archer lived in complete obscurity. Born to one of the most mysterious artists of the modern era, her childhood was far from typical, but it wasn't the glamorous or privileged life that many imagine when they think of a music legend's child. Her world was marked by silence, distance, and a complicated family dynamic very few ever got close to understanding. Those who followed D'Angelo's path know how fiercely private he has always been. Even in the late 1990s and early 2000s, during the peak of his fame, he avoided interviews, rejected the spotlight, and vanished from public life for years at a time. Behind closed doors, he was fighting his own demons, crushed under the weight of expectation, the relentless pressure of the industry, and the dark temptation of self-destruction. During those years when fans were eagerly waiting for new music, Imani was quietly growing up in the background, watching a father who was both a mystery and a legend. Imani's early childhood unfolded mostly away from the public eye. Sources close to the family say her mother worked hard to give her a relatively normal life, protecting her from the chaos that came with fame. Still, no amount of shielding could completely free her from living in the shadow of being D'Angelo's daughter. Even as a child, she understood that her father wasn't just another artist, he was a cultural force. But what she also came to know, perhaps better than anyone else, was the price that came with that status. Friends of the family often describe Imani as thoughtful and curious, sharing that quiet, introspective nature she inherited from her father. Yet, there was always a soft sadness about her, the kind born from growing up with too many unanswered questions. While D'Angelo was locked in battles with fame and personal demons, Imani was learning how to live without a father who was fully present. Later on, she would speak about those long periods when their communication was limited, and how the distance separating them wasn't just measured in miles, but in emotions too. Despite it all, Imani has never spoken with resentment. When she talks about her father, her voice carries empathy, not anger. She acknowledges the weight of his struggles and understands that for him, fame was never a gift, it was a burden. In a rare moment of openness, she reportedly shared her belief that her father's greatest battle wasn't with music, But with finding peace inside himself, as the years passed, Imani began to see the duality of her world with greater clarity. On one side, there was the father whose art touched millions, inspiring a generation of musicians. On the other, there was a man she barely knew, someone she loved deeply but didn't fully understand. That push and pull, that emotional tug of war, shaped much of her early life. Even as she entered adulthood, Imani kept her distance from the limelight. She rarely spoke about her father online, never leaned on his fame for attention, and seemed intent on paving her own way. But behind the scenes, she was quietly gathering her memories, her pain, her reflections, and her perspective on what it really means to be the child of a legend who never wanted the spotlight in the first place. It wasn't until recently that Imani finally made the decision to step forward and share her truth. And when she did, people began to listen, because this time the story wasn't coming from critics or fans. It was coming from someone who had lived it. A daughter. But before diving into her powerful words and what she's revealed about her father's inner battles, it's important to understand what pushed her to break her silence now, after all those years of fiercely guarding her privacy. For so long, Imani Archer remained quiet, watching the world endlessly dissect her father's life while she lived in the background. As time went on, the weight of that silence only grew heavier. Everywhere she turned, D'Angelo's name carried with it stories of brilliance, heartbreak, addiction, and mystery. To the world, he was a legend. To Imani, he was a ghost, a father she loved but could never truly reach. And eventually, the silence she had carried for years became too heavy to hold. Those closest to her describe her decision to speak out as something that developed slowly. Not out of anger, but from a deep need for clarity and peace. For most of her life, she'd watched the media completely misread her father. They called him troubled, reclusive, even a fallen star. But Imani always knew there was more to the story than what the headlines painted. She had seen the man behind the myth, the quiet, deeply emotional soul who carried heavy pain beneath his extraordinary talent. And she wanted the world to finally see that side of her father, the version hidden away behind rumors and sensationalism. Still, her decision to speak wasn't just about defending him. It was also about taking back her own identity. Imagine growing up with a name that immediately ties you to both greatness and tragedy. No matter where she went or what path she chose, Imani was always introduced as D'Angelo's daughter. That label followed her from childhood to her teenage years, and then into adulthood and her career. While she respected and admired her father's legacy, she longed to be recognized for who she was, an individual with her own story, her own voice, and her own journey. The turning point came when messages began pouring in online. Fans, bloggers, and even strangers reached out, asking questions about her father. Some were kind and gentle, others were invasive, and a few were outright cruel. Once again, the rumors about D'Angelo's personal life, his mental health, his mysterious disappearances started to spread. People demanded answers, and many assumed Imani was the one holding them. For a long time, she ignored the noise. But then came one message that shifted everything. A fan accused D'Angelo of abandoning his daughter for fame. That single comment struck a nerve, though rooted in speculation. The accusation touched something deep inside Imani. She had lived through the absence, the confusion, the emotional distance. But she also knew her father's silence wasn't born from neglect or a lack of love. It came from a man locked in a battle with his own demons, in an industry designed to consume the soul. It was then she realized, if she didn't speak for herself, others would keep defining her story for her. And that was the moment she decided to step out of the shadows. Her first public words came during a small, intimate online interview. No flashing lights, no polished script, just raw honesty. Imani spoke softly but powerfully, describing her childhood not as a tale of tragedy, but as a journey toward understanding. She explained that her father's struggles weren't rooted in arrogance or the corruption of fame, but in deep emotional wounds the world never allowed him to fully heal. "My father loved deeply," she said, "but the way the world loved him, that love hurt him." That single line spread like wildfire across social media. Fans who had once judged D'Angelo began to pause. For the first time, they weren't hearing speculation. They were hearing the voice of someone who lived it. Imani wasn't blindly defending her father. She was giving context, bringing humanity back to a man who had been turned into a myth. And in that process, she began to heal a part of herself, too. But Imani's decision to speak wasn't only about sharing family truths, it was about reclaiming the narrative. She wanted to show that being D'Angelo's daughter wasn't a weight to carry, but a lesson to be learned. Through her words, she revealed how fame can tear families apart, how talent can sometimes isolate more than it connects, and how the children of legends often carry emotional scars. No one ever sees her courage to speak up quietly opened the door for others. Like her, children of famous figures who grew up in the shadows, struggling with the same unspoken pain. Many people reached out to her privately, sharing how her honesty made them feel truly seen for the first time. Imani's story was striking a chord that went far beyond the D'Angelo fan base. It was resonating with anyone who had ever loved someone who couldn't fully love themselves in return. But of course, not everyone responded with kindness. Some critics accused her of trying to use her father's name for personal gain. Others questioned her intentions. But Imani remained composed through the criticism. She made it clear she wasn't speaking out for attention or sympathy. She was doing it for closure. Her words weren't about exposing anyone, they were about healing. Sometimes, she said, but truth isn't about secrets. It's about understanding why people hurt the way they do. That message landed deeply with countless viewers. All at once, the internet wasn't just discussing D'Angelo the artist, it was reflecting on D'Angelo the man, the father, the fragile human being beneath the fame. Imani's voice had done something powerful. It shifted the conversation from scandal to empathy. But her revelations didn't end there, as her story continued to spread. People began asking the question that had been whispered for years. What really caused D'Angelo to disappear from the spotlight for so long? And did Imani finally reveal what happened during those silent years? When the world first noticed D'Angelo's vanishing act, it sparked waves of confusion and curiosity. Here was a man once hailed as the savior of soul music, a voice so pure and magnetic that it seemed unthinkable he could just vanish. After the monumental success of his album Voodoo, fans wanted more music, more performances, more of his undeniable presence. Instead, D'Angelo disappeared. No shows, no interviews, no explanations. For years, there was only silence. But behind that silence, a storm had been brewing. And according to Imani Archer, those years weren't shrouded in mystery. They were a matter of survival. In her emotional reflections, Imani shared what it was like to witness her father's quiet collapse, not as a superstar, but as a man struggling to breathe under the crushing weight of fame. She described those years as a blur of distance, where phone calls were rare, visits unpredictable, and conversations often ended abruptly in exhaustion or quiet sadness. Imani revealed that as a child, she didn't fully grasp what was happening. She saw glimpses of her father's brilliance when he was home, his laughter, his love for music, the softness in his voice when he talked to her about life. But then, without warning, he'd be gone again. Retreating into isolation. To a young girl, that kind of absence felt personal. But as she grew older, she began to understand he wasn't running from her. He was running from the world. Imani explained that after Voodoo, her father felt trapped inside an image he had never asked for. Fans didn't just want to hear his voice. They wanted to own his body, his mystique, his sex appeal. The untitled "How Does It Feel" video turned him overnight into a symbol of desire. What the public saw as art, he experienced as exploitation. The relentless sexualization, the constant pressure to maintain that image, and the weight of impossible expectations slowly crushed his spirit. He didn't want to be a fantasy. Imani said softly in one interview. She explained that his addiction wasn't about reckless behavior or partying, it was about pain. He was trying to silence the noise. Fame, she said, had grown too loud. Everyone wanted a piece of him, and he didn't know how to protect what little he had left. Those long years of silence were his way of resisting, of taking back control over his own identity. But while the world thought they were watching a man hide from the spotlight, Imani was watching a father trying to heal. She remembered nights when he'd sit alone with his guitar, playing soft melodies that weren't meant for anyone else to hear. He wasn't performing, she said. He was remembering the man he was before the world became too big. For Imani, those silent years became a painful balancing act. On one side, she admired his strength, the courage it took to step away from an industry that demanded his soul. On the other, she ached for closeness, for the chance to know him beyond the fractured pieces fame had left behind. She spoke about birthdays missed, calls unanswered, and stretches of time filled with uncertainty. Yet, despite it all, she never stopped believing in his love. Even when he wasn't there physically, she felt him. "I knew he was fighting to come back," she said. "Not just to music, but to life." And when D'Angelo finally returned years later with his album Black Messiah, Imani described it as a moment of rebirth, not just for him, but for their relationship as well. That album, she explained, was his way of speaking again. Every lyric, every note, she said, was him reclaiming his voice. She remembered standing in the studio, watching him record, and seeing a spark in his eyes that had been gone for so long. This time, it wasn't about fame. It was about truth. But even with his return, the scars from those years of silence didn't just vanish. Imani admitted that while they eventually found peace, there were still some things left unsaid. Apologies that came too late, and questions that never really found their answers. Yet she didn't carry bitterness. Instead, she chose to see her father's journey as a lesson in humanity. "People think being a legend means being perfect," she said softly. "But legends are just people who break and still find a way to shine." Her words offered fans something they had never been given before. A look into D'Angelo's life not as a sensational headline, but as a deeply human story. Through Imani's voice, the world saw the man behind the mystery, the father behind the fame, and the soul behind the silence. Her honesty didn't just explain his disappearance, it helped people understand why sometimes walking away is the only way to survive. And as powerful as her reflections were, Imani also revealed that her father's struggles left behind a legacy of emotional truth, one that continues to shape her own journey even today. What she shared next took everyone by surprise. In the next part, we'll uncover how D'Angelo's pain inspired Imani to follow in his footsteps, not as a singer trapped in the spotlight, but as a woman determined to turn generational pain into purpose.